I spend my time going out into the world looking at new technologies and deciding which new technologies are worth us spending any time thinking about. Uh, and I've seen so many mistakes out there that groups make that over the years has raised our level of sophistication about how we make inquiries into new technologies. And so what I want to share with you a little bit are some of the lessons that we've learned, some of the internal techniques that we use when we're considering, do we make an investment in a new technology? Do we develop a new technology ourselves? Great. And so I'm just gonna jump right into it. Again, I'm an employee of Medtronic from a disclosure perspective. There's some great discussion by Dr. Sethi and others about what's going on in the world of healthcare today. And I don't think you can start any discussion about new technologies without considering the ecosystem that you're working in. And certainly there is more cost pressure, more scrutiny by patients and payers, increased demand for clinical data, and this shift that we've heard about from volume-based to value-based transactions in healthcare. And we, as a device company, have to be part of that solution. We have to play the same game, because if we don't, we're going to become obsolete very quickly. So the first observation here is that I don't know how many groups out there spend about 2 minutes thinking about what problem they're trying to solve and then jump right into the solution. It's fun to talk about technology. It's fun to build widgets. It's not, it's hard work to focus on what are really the underlying needs, and not just doing that across one or two people, but if you really want to do this well, you better understand who are the different types of customers out there and talk to enough of them to make sure that whatever you're talking about generalizes. Because I don't know how many research groups I've come across where there's 10 or 15 people, they have lots of money, and there's one surgeon who told them this is a problem. They never went out and bothered asking anybody else whether this thing was a problem. So the other thing, and when we think about this problem now, it used to be that it was good enough to say, there's clinical value in your new device. That was good enough. That's no longer sufficient now. There has to be economic value somewhere along the chain, whether that is taking money out of the system from a payer perspective, allowing a provider to get more utilization out of scarce resources, or whatnot. And this is a very interesting model that we use. So along the x-axis there, what it says is certainty of need, and along the y-axis is confidence solution. And so as we're thinking about a new idea, maybe we have an idea come in where there's great confidence in the solution, except nobody knows exactly what we're going to use it for. So this is the hammer in search of the nail. Right, and it's uncanny how much time we see this. You go in, there's a great technology, but people don't really know what you're going to use it for. And then on the other hand, it's like, well, if we could solve this problem, that would be wonderful. But we've all heard stories about unobtainium and substances like that, right? And so that's your target. And the key is that as you're going through this process, it's really an iterative process where you're taking small steps to better understand your need, better understand your solution, and kind of walking your way up that curve to the point of, if you get too far out ahead of yourself on one axis or another, you're probably being inefficient, and you're likely to be wasting energy, because you're probably going to fail, because either you don't understand your need well enough or your solution's infeasible. And if you don't believe me, Thomas Edison, I find out what the world needs, then I go ahead and try and invent it. Anything that won't sell, I don't want to invent. Its sale is proof of utility, and utility is success. So, this is not a new idea, right? So when you get down to needs, sorry these are so small here, but But when we break down needs in a clinical context, let's say you want to build the next disruptive navigation system, you may be thinking about things like it's got to be easy to learn because surgeons are notoriously, not willing to spending a lot of time learning new technologies. It's got to be safe. It's got to be efficient. It's got to be confidence inspiring, reliable, good economics, and all these things. And so we actually go through and for every new idea that comes in, we'll rate them on these scales, and maybe we'll give them scores or levels of importance like, well, you better have safety, because if it's not safe, nobody's going to use it, and it certainly has to be reliable and easy to use and all these things. But then we have something which we call leverage, right? Which is basically saying, well, if we succeed at achieving this, how effective is solution of that problem going to be towards gaining adoption of that technology, right? Everybody expects reliability in products. I mean, anything that's in the market. So if we spend extra time building more reliability into it, it's probably not going to get us a whole lot. And we actually look at that. I don't know if you can see this, but we think of in terms of technology S-curves here, where the dot along that S-curve represents where a given technology is in between the two bounds of being insufficient at the bottom or being good enough. If it's near that top line, then don't invest any more in improving upon that attribute. If it's near the bottom line, there may be a good reason to invest if it is in fact something important. And so again, we spend a lot of time talking about things like this because once you understand this stuff, sometimes finding the technology that solves the problem is the easy part, Another thing, just quickly, as we think about the phases of technology maturity, you have early feasibility phase, translation, and then commercially mature. Throughout this continuum, the risk decreases over time. Typically, investment increases over time. That early stage is where government funding, where angel and VC funding comes in most handy. And companies like Medtronic tend not to invest early on. We may invest in that anywhere along that translation continuum. So it could still be in early feasibility phase if it's a really bright technology. But we like to see some evidence. So I just kind of put that out there for those of you who are interested in developing new technologies and looking at, engaging with companies, understand, what the company you're approaching, what's their risk profile, where do they engage? And some companies have higher risk profiles than others, but this is generally how Medtronic thinks about it. The other thing I would encourage everybody to think about as technologies are being brought to the table are some sources of risk that are often pushed off to the side. And so certainly there's technology feasibility, but then there's commercialization risks. Intellectual property, a company, if you are looking to develop a technology and don't have patents around it, there's only so much interest you're gonna get. Most people know these things. Regulatory strategy turns out to be perhaps one of the biggest barriers to a company like Medtronic engaging, because a startup or a group will come along and say, hey, we've got this great new idea. The only problem is that the only way we can, get clearance for it will give you very broad general indications, which won't allow us to sell it on label. And selling it on label will in fact require 5 more years of clinical studies to, gain the indications that we need. And so, don't forget about regulatory strategy, and, clinical evidence kind of goes hand in hand with that, and also reimbursement. Validation, I'm just going to fly through these. Spend time validating the concept, because too many groups, again, have a solution, here it is, and as soon as you pressure test it at all, it completely falls apart. People haven't thought about user dependencies, a lot of the human factors, work that Ken was talking about, unrealistic test cases really are the demise of many, many technologies along the way. Many companies are interested in developing relationships and engaging early, maybe not engaging heavily upfront, but certainly we and I know many of our colleagues out in industry are very interested in hearing your ideas about what problems need to be solved and what the solutions are. And so then finally, I just want to leave you with a few ideas about some themes for technology innovation that we believe are important. So a while ago, Ken, I think, made the point that technology almost always results in complexity. There's an interesting phenomenon in complexity, though, that as a product increases in complexity, often the perception of complexity also increases until you get to a certain inflection point where there's enough technology, the iPhone, for example, where now the perception starts going back down. And so I think that navigation and imaging are at that inflection point. We've gotten about as complex as we can get. From a perception perspective. I believe that investing more on the technology side can only take us over that point and begin to reduce your experience of the complexity of this technology. Automation, we heard from the Surgimap folks and others about the need for automation in planning tools. Cost-effective surgical imaging. I mean, so the ORM is nice. I hope that something disrupts it at some point because, it's big, it's expensive, and I think that at some point we can do better. What that is, I don't know yet. But I imagine there's going to be, that next generation of imaging technology. We heard from Chris about improved means of visualization in the operating room and augmented reality. Always, how do you take all of the information that you as surgeons are interested in and bring them into the operating room and put them there in a way that is valuable. And we just talked a little bit, Dr. Polly was talking about preoperative and predictive measures of surgical success. So these are all things that we spend time, thinking about, going out into the world looking for. And I just wanted to seed the conversation with some of these. And so, finally, I would say, as you're thinking about this, start your journey by thinking about what the goal is. And really spend a lot of time thinking about what you're trying to achieve rather than what the solution to your problem is, because sometimes you're not thinking about the right problems to begin with. So I will end on that.